Title: The Insane 40-Year Bone Scam That Fooled the Entire World. In 1912, a fragment of skull and a partial jawbone found in a gravel pit in Sussex, England, were presented to the Geological Society of London as the most important discovery in the history of paleoanthropology. The creature they came from was dubbed Eoanthropus dawsoni, Dawson's Dawn Man. He had a large human-like brain and a primitive, ape-like jaw, exactly the combination that scientists of the time expected to find in a genuine missing link between apes and modern humans. Museums built reconstructions, textbooks were rewritten, careers were built on the discovery. For 41 years, Piltdown Man shaped the entire field of human evolutionary research. Then, in 1953, scientists proved the whole thing was a fake. The Piltdown discovery was the work of Charles Dawson, an amateur archaeologist and solicitor from Sussex, who had spent years collecting fossils and geological specimens. He was genuinely passionate about natural history, genuinely skilled as a fossil hunter, and genuinely hungry for the kind of recognition that a major discovery would bring. He had been corresponding with Arthur Smith Woodward, the head of geology at the Natural History Museum in London, for years before the supposed discovery. In 1912, he brought Woodward fragments of what he claimed to have found in gravel deposits near Piltdown Common in East Sussex. What Dawson presented was a medieval human skull that had been carefully carved and stained with an iron solution and potassium bichromate to give it the appearance of great age. The jaw was from an orangutan, with the teeth filed down to create wear patterns consistent with a human diet and the same staining applied. The two pieces, from entirely different species and entirely different time periods, had been assembled and altered to look like a single individual. The result was a creature that seemed to confirm the then current hypothesis that human evolution began with brain expansion, a being with a big human-like brain but a primitive ape-like jaw, suggesting that intelligence came first and the rest of the anatomy followed. This was, as it turned out, completely wrong as a model of human evolution. The real sequence, as we now know, began with bipedalism, then dietary changes, then gradual expansion of brain size over millions of years. But in 1912, Piltdown Man fit the expectations of the day, and that fit was part of what made the forgery so effective. The scientists examining it largely saw what they expected to see. Smith, Woodward, and Dawson presented the find to the Geological Society in December 1912 to acclaim. Additional fragments appeared over subsequent years, a second skull piece in 1915, a carved bone tool in 1914 that turned out to be a sharpened elephant femur. Each new piece arrived through Dawson, who died in 1916, before any serious doubts had been raised. The site had been carefully curated over years to build a pattern of associated finds that made the discovery seem even richer. The doubts that existed were largely ignored. A small number of anatomists and anthropologists in Britain, and especially in the United States and France, raised questions about the compatibility of the skull and jaw. The jaw looked too ape-like. The skull looked too modern. Arthur Keith, who produced detailed reconstructions of Piltdown Man, actually noted in private that the two pieces seemed mismatched, but concluded, as many did, that this was simply what a genuine transitional form would look like. The cognitive investment of the British scientific establishment in the discovery was enormous, and the doubts were easier to set aside than to pursue. What finally broke the case was technology. In 1949, a chemist named Kenneth Oakley applied fluorine dating to the Piltdown bones. The technique exploits the fact that bones buried in the same deposit absorb fluoride from groundwater at the same rate over time. So bones from the same period should have the same fluoride content. Oakley found that the skull and the jaw had different fluoride levels, inconsistent with them coming from the same individual buried in the same deposit. The skull was medieval in age, the jaw was modern. The full exposure came in 1953, when a team from the Natural History Museum and Oxford University subjected all the Piltdown material to a comprehensive battery of analyses. The staining was identified as artificial, iron and potassium bichromate, applied deliberately. The filed teeth were examined under a microscope and showed marks consistent with a metal file rather than natural wear. The jawbone was confirmed as orangutan. Nitrogen dating established the actual ages. Piltdown Man was definitively, publicly, and comprehensively exposed as a forgery in November 1953, 41 years after its original presentation. The question of who did it remained unresolved for decades. Dawson was the obvious suspect. He had controlled access to the site, presented all the finds, and died before the fraud was exposed, conveniently beyond cross-examination. But various other suspects were proposed over the years, including Arthur Conan Doyle, who lived nearby and had a passion for practical jokes. A 2016 study using ancient DNA techniques, isotope analysis, and morphological comparison examined all the Piltdown material and concluded that all the specimens, including those from the supposed second site found in 1915, came from the same orangutan individual. This finding strongly implicates a single forger working with a single source of orangutan material, and the entire chain of evidence points most directly to Dawson. The damage the fraud did to the field was real and lasting. Because Piltdown Man seemed to confirm that brain expansion preceded physical changes, it distorted interpretation of genuinely real fossils for 4 decades. When Raymond Dart found the Tong child, Australopithecus africanus, in South Africa in 1924, its combination of a small brain and bipedal anatomy conflicted with the Piltdown model, and it was largely ignored for years. The fossils that might have accelerated understanding of human evolution were sidelined in part because Piltdown Man occupied the theoretical space they should have filled. After 1953, the field reoriented rapidly. The evidence from Africa, the Australopithecines, the early Homo fossils, the stone tools, fell into a coherent pattern that Piltdown had been obscuring for decades. What had been a muddled picture sharpened considerably once the fake was removed. Piltdown Man was not the result of the scientific community being gullible. It was the result of a skilled forger anticipating what scientists wanted to find and providing it at a moment when the analytical tools to detect the fraud did not yet exist. When the tools arrived, the forgery did not survive the first serious examination. Science corrects itself. It took 41 years this time, but it got there.